Hi, good day. Welcome to another session on the AI and Automation Specialist course. My name is Mufe Akinlam. Today I'll be taking you on integrating AI applications with function calling and designing UX user experience for AI applications. Well, first of all, we'll be starting with integrating function callings. We'll try to understand what function calling is, how to implement them in our applications, and the appropriate standards to follow. So, okay. Our learning objectives for today will be understanding what function calling is. We'll explain what function calling is. We'll identify key use cases, and we'll try to solve a real world problem with it. We'll set up and perform a configuration that will allow us to use uh, a deployed model on Azure, and then we'll encapsulate it with code and get it to perform actions based on our use case. And then we'll do an application integration. So all this I'll show you as we go further into the class. So what is the challenge? The challenge is inconsistent responses. No, before function calling came, LLM responses were unstructured and inconsistent. And what that means is if you had if you had a model that was trained on certain for a certain use case, right? And the way models work is once they are trained, they can answer questions based on that use case. They are well informed, and the more they are trained, the more details they can return to you. So when when you decide to use models to perform different and particular tasks, if the model isn't trained or if there's a gap in the training, you can get errors and you can get formats that are not well supported. Now, if you don't train a model to respond in a particular format, or if it doesn't know to respond in a particular format, it can give you information that will not suit your database. And if the model returns a format that is not acceptable to your database, it can crash your entire system. So this is where function callings come into place. Function calls allow your model to perform external activities, external solutions in a sense that normally they would not have been able to perform, like going to a different website, going to a different platform to gather information and retrieve that information and display back for the user or the developer. Now, a quick example would be you're extracting student data, and the same prompt could return grades as 3.7 and 3.7 GPA. Now, the difference in that is that one has no GPA and the other does, and which is an inconsistent format. Now, it will not fit into your database if your database is set up to accept uh, data with the GPA at the back. If it returns just 3.7, your whole system might crash because now it doesn't know where to place that particular value. Now this is where again what function calling can do for you. Now function calling allows consistent response formats. Now we can define a function that anytime the model replies a certain way, it converts that 3.7 to 3.7 GPA, right? So our model knows to call that function. So if you write a prompt and the model has done all the hard work, but now the response isn't defined the way to suit our system, the model can now call that function, right? Get the function to fine-tune the output and get us our desired format. So that's why it says it allows for consistent response formatting for reliable system integration. It allows you for external data access. So like I said, it gives you access to other platforms to retrieve data and retrieve information that your model doesn't necessarily know or hasn't been trained on, but it gives your model that ability to get that information for you. And then it allows for structured outputs that depend, that the applications depend on. Now, a real world scenario will be an educational chatbot. Now, so later on in the class, we'll build a chatbot, right, for educational purposes. And what this bot will do is based on the user's query, it could be on whatever topic or course that you want to learn about. This chatbot would use a function, get that information from an external website, and then provide it back to us, right, as an output for the user. So what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a model in Azure OpenAI, basic, just a basic conversational model, right, for the natural user interaction. We'll create a function around the Microsoft Learn API. So basically that function would go to the Microsoft Learn platform and retrieve the information that we need for this course, right? And then the function callings will now transform that query, will transform our query into an API request and receive that information for our model to display back to us. So this is an example demonstrating the problem. Now we're going to examine two scenarios. Student one's description says Emily Johnson is a sophomore majoring in computer science at Duke University. She has a 3.7, right? Student two's description says Michael Lee is a sophomore majoring in computer science at Stanford University. He has a 3.8 GPA. Now, the first response, if you look closely, it doesn't have a GPA format, right? But the second one does. Now, because of that varying in formatting, we might have problems in our entire system just because of that little difference in format size. So this is just to show you how minute the problem is, even if it might cause big damage. But the point is, things as little as this can affect your entire system's performance. So how does function calling work? Now function calling creates a structure for the LLM to follow and what function to run with what parameters. Now, so like we said, the LLM doesn't perform the action. All it does is calls on the right function to perform that action for it, and then displays the output based on what we desire. So the user's query, which is natural language, the LLM processes, which is uh, the application brain, right? It processes the query and then determines what functions to call based on the user's query. The function then runs and then returns structured parameters, right? And then the app executes the function, runs that function, and we get our desired result. So it goes users query, LLM processing, function calls, and then it executes, and then we get our response or respond. So the key use cases for function calling. Function calling allows us to call and use XML tools. So it enables chatbots to perform actions like send an email to an instructor saying, I need help, right? This triggers a function like send email. Now, later on in the class, I'll show you what a function looks like, how you define a function, and then how we call the function into our main app file to perform whatever task that we needed to perform. Now, as you see, that send email is just a function name, but I'll show you the entire code block that represents a function, right? So it allows us to call XML2. So our function calls can allow us to send emails, check weather apps, can retrieve data from different websites, right? Next one, it allows us to create API or database queries. Now, this This is another aspect. Now, what this means is that if we have a database of student information, class, uh, grades, and all those other things, right? If we have a database full of students in a school, right? And then we want to get information from that database, by designing the right function, right? We can use that to call and query that database to get the student name, the assignment, and the status. So from a basic prompt, we can say, oh, kindly retrieve the student name, this assignment, and if the student's assignment has been marked or not, right? Based on the name that you put in, and then what assignment it is, and then the status, the function will go to your database and retrieve that information for you based on what you want. We can also we can also create structured data. So we can create structured data. Let's say we have a website like Wikipedia, right? And that has information about so many things, right? But we want to find out about AI automation, for example. Now, Wikipedia has a page for that. But instead of reading the entire thing, we want flashcards. We want flashcards that give us definitions, gives us questions, gives us answers, gives us thought process, right? So we can define a function that does that, that once prompted by our model, once we tell the model, okay, I need flashcards for the course AI automation from the source Wikipedia, right? The model will prompt this function, right, to get so the name of the function would be get important facts. So that function will go to Wikipedia, right? Get us the name, the date, the parties, whatever, what are the sources, what are that information that we desire or we need to pass the exam that we're studying for. So that's how it creates structured data for us. So, like I said, we're going to work through class. We're going to work through a practical in this class to understand what it is to perform a function calling, to perform function calling, and to get our desired output. Now, currently on my slide screen is just Python code, and I don't want you to focus too much on it, but it gives us an idea of what it is to set up an environment, right? Imports our libraries, uh, create connections to our OpenAI platform, which we will also use because our model is going to be hosted on OpenAI, right? We're going to deploy that model on OpenAI. For us to interact with that model, we need information on that model. We need to know what the OpenAI key is, the version, and the deployment endpoint, right? You see, load.mv is a library that allows us to hide our key credentials. Now, assuming this was our main structure file, our main app file, we wouldn't want to add all our information like the API key and the version and the deployment endpoint. Now, we wouldn't want to do this because if the application file gets into the wrong hands and people have access to this valuable information, right, they can, well, use it for harmful activities, which in turn will get our result, get our account or our platform bad or well canceled in a sense. So this is a basic Python code block, and then we'll look further into it, but it's good to have a general idea what it looks like. So we're in this file, we're importing libraries and we're telling our app where to look for our credentials. So we're going to create the message. Now, a message basically tells the model who's talking. It could either be the uh, model talking, the user talking, or it could be content or the assistant talking. Now, what that means is we're trying to define a role for the in our application file, right? And if like on our screen currently we have message role user, which refers to us, the user, the developer, and the content refers to what we want to ask our model. Find me a good course for beginner students to learn Azure, right? And this current one set up, it just shows us this is for the user. This is if the user is talking, right? There are different types of roles, right? It could be system. If it's system, it means we're trying to set rules and give the model context. Again, I'll try to show you what that looks like. If it's assistant, we're referring to the AI model, and if it's user, it means us, the user endpoint. So basically, it could be the role could be system, assistant, or user. But for this class, we'll mostly be using the user because we are trying to interact with the model accurately. So the role clarifies whether it's a system, the LLM, or the end user speaking. This allows to build conversational history that the LLM can reference. So now we're going to define functions. Again, this is code block, and I don't want you to focus too much on it because we will look at it again. But we're going to define functions. And when you're defining the function, you're basically explaining what the function does and how it does it. So each function needs certain things like the parameters, the objective, what level. Now so let's say we're defining the current function, which is search courses. So the function name is search course, right? The description, which is another parameter, is retrieves courses from the search index based on the parameters provided, right? The parameters then are another parameter then is type, object, property, row. All right, excuse me. Apologies. So this code block just basically defines what a function will look like. It's not well, the indentation isn't well defined, so it looks completely confusing. All right, so but we will look at it better when we get to the practical side of things. So let's move on to understanding what the function structure is. So we need to determine a name. So we identify what the function must be called. It must be unique and descriptive, right? We also need a description. So we need to clearly explain what the function does. It needs to be specific. The LLM uses this to decide when to call the function. So based on the description, our LLM brain can determine or decide what function to use and when to use it. And then the other parameters it defines the structure of the data the function expects, including type, properties, and require field. Now, what that means is for the function to run, there's certain boxes that must be ticked off so that our function can perform as it should, right? So we need to know certain things. So like what the user needs, what course the user wants to study, what level the user needs, what level the user is studying from. It could be beginner, it could be expert, it could be intermediate. So those boxes need to be checked so that our function can make an accurate call and then return with the desired information. So we're gonna talk. Step three is making the function call. Uh, Again, we'll see it in the practical, but inside the function, your API call and set the function call to auto. So when you set the function call to auto, it allows your LLM to decide what function to call and when to call it. So again, all this is code files. This is just the response format. So we're going to client chat completion, which is a completion to create. And our model will be the model we deploy. The message is what the user's message is, which we looked at before. The functions is equal to the functions that we have set up in a different file, and the function call is equal to auto. Now, like I said, putting it to auto allows our model to decide which function to use, and then we complete the code by printing our statement. So we print our response dot choice dot message. So this is a basic payload format now or response structure. So the role here is the assistant, and then the function call is the name of the function that we want to call, which is search course. The argument is the role is a student, the product is the course that the person wants to learn is Azure, and the level that the person wants to learn is beginner. Right. So the LLM extracted the student, the course, Azure, and then the level beginner from the user's message and structured them as function arguments. Now this demonstrates how function calling provides both information extraction and response structure. Apologize for the repetition. So now we're talking about how to integrate this into our application. We'll integrate the function into our application, right? We'll import the function via calling the function name, and you see that later on. And the function will have access to the external API, and then will return natural language responses for us to display to the user. So basically, the way it runs is once the user prompts, writes in a prompt, the LLM will capture the information from the prompt and then determine what function to use. We would have already defined our Python function, right? So we would it would define what function to use based on the functions that we have already defined. So we'll create an actual function that can call external APIs. So when the user sends in the prompt, our model can execute that function. So run the function with the extracted parameters. And then once the function is done running, it will return that information back to our LLM. So based on the user's prompt, the function and all the LLM will extract the key points. So what course the user wants to do, the uh, the user's level, right? And based on those parameters that it has extracted, it would run and then retrieve our desired outputs and send that back to the LLM for it to display. So we're trying to talk about how we integrate function calls to our applications and so that our application can develop the right outputs for us, right? Because as we know, models cannot tell you what they don't know. And if they do, that's when we say it's hallucination, which means that it is wrong. So by the time we are done integrating our model into our application, and then the user has run a prompt, and then and then the function has done its run, and then derived our information, usually we should get a final natural language response looking like what we have currently on the screen. So it would reply usually like I found some good courses for beginner students to learn Azure. Describe concepts in cryptography, introduction to audio classification with TensorFlow, design a performant data model in Azure SQL database with Azure and Azure Data Studio. Also, another course is Get Started with Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework from Azure, set up the Rust development environments. You can click the links to access the course. And usually by the time it's done, it will provide us links so that we can find the courses that we're looking for. That's how efficient LLMs could be. So the LLM must transform the structured API response into a friendly conversational format with clickable links. So it's gone from, because in the back end, the way applications interact between each other is usually in JSON format, which is a language, right? And so that's what allows applications to interact via API, right? And but if our function responds back to us in that JSON format, right? And that's what our applications use to send information generally between each other is JSON format, right? If it returns back, it returns that back to us in that format. We naturally, if someone that doesn't understand code wouldn't understand what's happening. For a student that hasn't been taught Python, for the students we're trying to help with our use case, it wouldn't be able to read that JSON format. So what happens is when our function returns our desired information, our LLM now converts that back to natural language of response, which is what we see currently on our screen. So let's run through a quick knowledge check to test our understanding. So the question one says question one says function calling purpose. What are the two main problems that function calling solves in LLM application? It allows us to work on our format, and then it allows us to query our databases. It allows us to retrieve information from external sources, which our model naturally wouldn't have access to. And then it allows us to fine-tune our format so that we can store the information in our database just as we want. So question two says function structure. What are the key three key properties most every function definition include, and what roles do they play? So the three key properties are we need a name, a description, and the parameters for the search. So we need to ensure that the name is descriptive, is unique. We need to ensure that the description tells us what the function does, and the parameters, what information do we need from the user's query to perform the task that is at hand. And then question three says application flow. Explain the complete flow from user's message to final response when using function calls. What happens at each step? So the first step would be the user's query, where our model tries to understands what the user is asking, and then extract the information, and then determines what function to use to perform the task, right? Once that is done, we execute our application executes that function, which means that once the function is run, it sends a payload to our external platform, websites, database, and then retrieves the information, our desired information for the users. Now, once the information is retrieved from the external platform, the function has run its course. And now based on how the format is returned, which is usually JSON, our model converts that information from JSON format back to natural language so that the user can understand what it's talking about or what we're talking about or what the model is talking about in a sense. I hope that helped understand what we have been talking about so far. All right, so at that point, I will pause now before we go into designing UX for our AI applications. I will go ahead to break away into our practical class. Now, for the practical, we'll be using Visual Studio Code. We'll have uh, an environment set up, but we'll have our scripts, we'll have a file, we'll have our functions in them, and then I'll walk you through how to deploy a model briefly and how to get the information for that model, and then how to integrate that into our application, and how we get our application to call the right function, and how we get our results, which is the courses that we need and links to those courses. So I'm going to stop sharing now and prepare the practical side. All right, so I'm going to show you how I deployed a model on Azure, how to get the credentials that we'll use for the model, and then we'll proceed from there. So this is the Microsoft Azure platform, and I have already created a project, but if you wanted to create a project from start, you create a new project or resource, and then you follow the user interface till you get to this point in your platform. I hopefully some of you have come across it already. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to deploy a model. I already have, but I'll again show you briefly how to do that. So once we are in our project, which is this, like I said here, this is our project that we're created. We can create a new project. So it'll be a resource or a hub, but we won't do that. So since we have our current project, we go to our models and endpoints. Now we'll try to deploy a model. So all we need to do is deploy a base model, and search for the model we want. We could use GPT-5, GPT-2, internet is slow, 5, 2, but today we'll do 4. So I'll search for this and just wait. So we have all the different variations. We have transcribe, text to speech, nano, mini. but we'll do the 4.1 mini. This is chat completion and responses, right? So you click on the model that you want, you click confirm, and it will deploy the model for you. So once that is done, you have your model appear here. This is a deployed model, right? Successful deployed. So you click on that model, and then it shows you all the information about the model. It shows you your target URL, URI, the key point, the endpoint, sorry, your API key, your endpoint. Shows you the name, date it was created, the version. Now, all this information is what we need so that we can interact with this model that we have deployed. So that we deployed a chat GPT-4, which is a model that has been trained for so many things, most likely multimodal. So it can do pictures, it can do text, but I'm guessing this is mostly chat completions, right? So we're going to focus on this model and we're going to get all this required endpoints. Now, this, you see how is hidden. It's just to illustrate the point that if any of this information gets out to the public, your account, your setup, your application is exposed. There is a security risk or a risk or a breach in a sense. So people can get information to your database, who will get access all your information for your company and all that. So it is advised to always keep that in the .env file. So now that we've deployed our model and we have our information that we need, we're going to go to our VS Code and then we're going to start coding. Now, again, I've already developed all the code, but I'm going to try to explain to you what each line of code does and how that brings us closer to our goal, how that forms the entire application. So here we have our application, right? And if you look to the left, if you look to the left, we have our functions, which basically shows us the current functions that we have set up. So our function variable currently has two functions. We have one function, and this is a description. It just shows us what our function is. So the metrics that each function needs to have so that our model knows how to call it and when to call it. So first of all, a name, get cost by row. So this function allows us to get courses based on the role that we specified. Now, the description retrieves Microsoft Learn courses based on users' role. The parameters is type, it is an object, and then the properties, the role, the type, string, will accept strings, and then description, the user's technical role, e.g. AI engineer. Now, the required key point for this function is role. Like it helps us get courses based on our role, right? The next function we have is get courses based on level. Now retrieves curated courses based on the skill level. So now this one allows us to get courses based on beginner level, expert level, intermediate, and so on. And again, so description, skill level based on beginner, advanced, and intermediate. And then the key requirement for this is the level, right? So now based on how the user's prompt is, so it could either be, oh, get me a course for my AI engineering role, or to help me learn my AI engineering role, or get me a beginner's level course on computer science. Now, it would give us options and links for these courses. Now, if we go further down, we're going to now define our functions. Now, we've given them a description, we've defined, now we're going to define them via code. Now, what this does is we're going to define our get course by code. So the target URL, so this is the external platform that our model will be talking to, and that's the Microsoft Learn catalog role, right? If there's an error, then it gives us the fallback unable to fetch courses right now. And this is just we're just setting up we're defining our function calls. This basically is what a function looks like. Here we've defined an entire function from here, just about here is basically all we need to define the function. So it also specifies the title, the type of course, the level, and then it gives us the output to give us the URL for that course that we need. So our return will be the role and the courses, right? The next function we'll define is get courses by level. Now this is a sample. So it was beginner, it will give us a basic Python basic. We'll add URL for us if it and HTML, CSS, and add the URL. If it's intermediate, again, the course name, the title, and then the URL. Advanced, again, the course name and the URL. And the course is, of course, the sample. So, or the final result based on whatever the user's query will be. Or then it will return the level and the courses. So now we've just showed you what I've showed you what a function script looks like. So basically in this script, we're just defining our functions and trying to get our functions to work the way we want them to work. Now, if we go further, we'll look at the .env file. Now, basically what this is how we store our secret variables away from the main file. Now, once we have stored our information here, we can call them into our main application via the load.env variable, right? Oh, sorry, library. And I'll show you what that looks like. Now, currently in this file, we've saved our API key, our endpoint, the version, and our deployment name. So we don't want any of this information exposed out to the public because it could be damaging to us and our company. So that's why it's best to save it in a .env file. And then we go to our main application file. Now, this application basically is supposed to be our educational chatbots. Now, the whole purpose of this app is to, based on the user's query, get our desired courses based on the level, the type of course, and it will derive the information for us. Now, this application is going to make reference to the functions that I showed you before in this file, right? It's going to go and call these functions, this one and this one, to perform the task that we needed to. Now, if we look at the start of our application, we have to import our libraries and our dependencies. So we're going to import the OS, JSON. Like I said, JSON is a language or format that allows applications to interact between each other, right? Then we form .env, which is, like I said, is a library that allows us to extract our variables, our key variables from the .env file, and we can use them in our main file without explicitly writing. So we don't want to have our API key put here. We don't want to have our API key put here because if it's put here, then that means that anybody has access to it. So we're going to just reference this as Azure OpenAI key, Azure OpenAI endpoint, Azure OpenAI API version, Azure OpenAI deployment, right? So that's what .env allows us to do. So we import the function from the .env library. And then also from OpenAI, we import our Azure OpenAI class. And then from functions, we import the course functions. So what this is now from this function folder, we're going to import our function file. And from that function file, we're going to import the functions, our two functions. All right, so now we have our two functions present in our main application file. We don't have to necessarily define them right here, like we did in the, like we don't have to define our function, define get. We don't have to do that here because we already defined it in our course file, right? So all we need to do is just make reference to call the function by their name. That's why the names have to be unique. So our model knows what functions we're looking for. So again, we've called our functions here. Second. So we've called our functions. So now we're going to load out the env. So we're going to load our variables, our secret variables. So Azure OpenAI key, the endpoint API version. We're just naming them as different variables in the app file, but they mean the same thing. So then I'll define our client, which is an Azure OpenAI client. And then the API key is our key that we defined here, the version, this one, and the endpoint, this, as we have defined it here. So this allows us to interact with our model that we've deployed on the Azure platform. So we're going to define another function. This function is this function allows our application to call our functions. So we're defining a function in our application that allows us to call our functions from the other file, all right? And then we close up with our response, our client chat completion, right? Which allows our application to generate our desired response for us. So remember, our model is our OpenAI deployer model. The message is what our user will input once the application starts. Now we don't have a user interface, but we'll talk about that in the next half of the class. But if we had that, we wouldn't have to look at all this code. So the message is equals to the user's input. And like I said, once we start the application, we'll see the avenue to add our desired input. So our functions is equals to the cost function functions. So those functions that were mentioned in this, then we allow a function called auto. So our model can determine what function to use based on the user's query. And also we need to determine our max tokens so that we don't overextend our reach and we have just enough information per user request. All this is just body for the code, and I don't want to take time in this, but it's just the same thing. It's iterating the point. This is our message, system content. We don't even need to see this. This is not important. This is just backend logic. But basically, once the application runs, and then we're able to print, we will see our bot's response based on the user's query. And before I go into that, I want to make sure or see if we remember what it is to set up a virtual environment to run our application. Now, usually before you start coding or writing your code, it's usually best to set up your virtual environment, right? And then you install your dependencies. I didn't show you this file, but this is our requirements of the TXT file. And from previous classes, it shows us what libraries and dependencies that we need for our application to run. And for this application, we need OpenAI, we need request, and then python.env. So usually you start off by creating a virtual environment using Python, make virtual environment. We can name it anything we want. We can name it Buffet and it would do that. But the standard is .env, and that's what we have here. This is our virtual environment created. So I'm not going to do that again, but usually you'd run that, it would run, and then you activate your environment using the environment name, scripts, activate, activate. All right. And once you do this, usually your environment will come up and you would see this green tag with the environment name on it. So as I said, I've already activated my environment, but I'm just trying to show you how to set up your virtual environment. So once you activate your environment, which is a isolated environment for you to develop in, so anytime you just activate your environment, your application should run smoothly. Once you've done that, you need to install your requirements, which is usually done by pip install read requirements.txt. So we're telling our terminal to read our requirements.txt file, and install all these libraries so that our application can run. If not, we're going to have, well, wriggly lines or squiggly lines in our applications, errors in a sense. So it won't be able to run because it's missing dependencies. So again, I've already done that. You know what? I'll do that so we can see what it says, as I did in the previous class. And then it should say requirements already satisfied. So that means we are at a go. So it means we can proceed from here. So clean this up, and then that being said, I would like to run the application and show us what the educational application does by retrieving the desired output. So I'll start the application by writing Python and then the name of the script, do app.py. So it says ask for a course recommendation, right? So I want to learn beginners, give me uh give me beginner courses. And so give me beginner courses in computer science. Now the application is starting up. Our model has sent the payload. Our model has determined what our user wants, right? It has removed the key information. It has picked the function that it wants to pick, right? And then since what we said beginner course, so it's going to pick the second function, which is the function that says get course by level, right? She's going to pick that second one because we have designed it to do that. So it's going to pick the second function. That second function is going to go on the run. So it's going to run, right? Go to the platform or the website that hosts that information and retrieve the desired information from the website and then send it back to our model. And our model now converts that from JSON format to natural language, which we now see here. So it says, here are some beginner courses in computer science that you can explore. Python basics, learn Python basics. This course is designed for beginners to learn fundamentals of Python programming, HTML and CSS, right? A great starting point for those interested in web development. Cover the basics of HTML, CS to build responsive websites. So it's given us a link to both courses, and we can try and follow those links and see where it leads us. But we won't do that for this class. All right, so we'll write another prompt. Now, this prompt will be based on the role. So get me courses to help courses on my role. So let's see what happens now. So again, I was going to run the same procedure, determine the function to use, run the function, and give us courses that we can use. So as an AI specialist, you can consider the following courses to enhance your skills. AI for Everyone, Coursera, learn the application of AI for various sectors and how to navigate AI projects, deep learning specialization, machine learning, AI for machine learning for business, and artificial intelligence. Now, these are all the courses that it has provided for us based on the role that we suggested. So again, it has picked the function based on what the user's query is. Now, note we can have so many functions in our function files. We only have two, but we can have as many as possible doing different things with the distinct names. Now, we put the function call to auto so that based on that user's query, our model or application can pick the right function to call to solve our purpose. Now, with that being said, this is a practical showing you how we integrate functions into our application and we get our application to call those functions accurately. So I'll finish this and session ended. Goodbye. So with that said, I hope you can understand what it is to develop a function, get your application to call that function, and what the function does, what the functions can help us do, how the functions make models function better or work better because they don't have necessary abilities to perform certain tasks. They can only really answer based on what they are taught. But if you wanted to perform additional functionalities, additional tasks, you need to add functions. And you could have some places have already defined functions for you, and you could have constant custom functions, which are functions that you develop yourself. Now, the functions are vary and are vast and can serve for different purposes. So with that said, I hope you understand what it is to integrate what it is to what functions are, what it is to function call, and how to integrate those functions into your application. Now I'll proceed to the next segment of the class, which is designing UX for AI application. All right, so I will proceed. So now we're going to be talking about designing UX for AI applications. Now, UX means user experience, right? We're trying to ensure that if we're designing an application, we're designing the user interface for an application, we have to ensure that the design meets a certain standard. It accomplishes certain things because if our UI or UX is lacking in any areas or in certain areas, it means that our application won't function to the best of its capability. It means we won't retain customers or users the way we should. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, you have your application can do so many things. The backend can do so many things. We can get it to write to derive information. We can get it to extract information from external websites. We can get it to do so many things. But if the way the app is presented to the users is not sufficient, it doesn't meet the standard that we're about to talk about, the chances that your application would be used or will perform to the standard or to perform to this to the levels that we hoped that it would when we designed it will probably not happen because we haven't designed the UI in a way that it supplements our backend. It doesn't bring out the best features of our backend, right? It's not allowing users to make use of all the functionalities, all the functions, all the backend logic that we have designed back behind the scenes. If the UI doesn't allow the users to fully access and understand and make full use of our backend, then we have, honestly, as designers, front-end designers, you have failed because now your app is not going to perform the way you should perform. So now I want to talk about designing UI, UX for AI applications. So the learning objective is we need to understand the user's needs. So this is key when you're designing UX for AI applications. We need to understand what the user's needs are. So for every app that you're developing, right, you need to have a problem that you're trying to fix. So a service that you're providing. So you're trying to satisfy certain users in a certain domain. So we need to understand what our application does and how it helps our users, how it aids our users' needs. We need to design for trust. So we need to ensure that when we're designing our application it promotes transparency, explainability, and then which in return builds users' confidence, right? We need to enable collaboration, so implement fallback mechanisms, error handling, so that when our application can't answer a certain user's query, it doesn't just say, oh, I don't know, lock on another platform. If your application does that, and it means that you don't want to keep your users, you don't want your users to come back. If after any small thing, your application is like, uh, we don't do that here. You can go ahead, check another place, right? If it does that, it means that you're not welcoming enough to maintain or retain your users. And then we need to ensure that we apply best practices, right? So we need to integrate accessibility, control, ensure that we have a pleasant experience, but throughout the entire design and the application process. So what is user experience? User experience is how users interact with our specific product or services. It could be tools, system, be it a system, tool, or design. When developing a application, developers must focus on ensuring the user experience is both ethical, effective, and ethical, right? So we also have to pay attention that we're not just designing an interface, we're designing an interface that interacts with an intelligent system. So what that means is the AI application that we have designed in our backend is already brilliant, right? It means that the front end, the user interface has to meet that standard, has to be just as brilliant so that it can expose the key features and services that our back end, our AI system offers. So a user-centered design prioritizes the users, ensures products are relevant and beneficial for those they are intended to serve. So there are four pillars for a good UI user experience. So we have to ensure that the user experience or the front end design is useful. The application has functionality that matches the intended purpose, such as automating grading and generating flashcard for revision, right? It has to be useful, reliable, so it maintains consistency throughout without errors, and we should include proper error handling. So if there's an error, it has to be able to explain that error to the user in a way that makes not that it sends the user away, but makes the user want to come back again or try something else, try another angle. It has to be accessible because there are different people around the world, different people unfortunately, with disabilities. Some are blind, deaf, some can't type. So you need to design your user interface so that it can accommodate all those different populations, right? So if someone doesn't have hands, allow for a voice feature on your application. Allow for different factors that will allow the user use of our application to the best of their ability. And then it has to be pleasant, it has to be enjoyable, and then it has to show a creative side to the application. So we're going to so the next step would be to understand your users. In our educational startup, we had two primary users, teachers and students, each of them having unique needs and that must be addressed throughout the user design. So for our practical, I showed you a backend, like we were writing code and we're having to interact with the terminal. But if I was going to take that application, my backend, which I already designed, I was going to take it out into the world. I'll need a user interface. I'll need the user experience. I'll need a front end so that my users can interact without having to write code or learn code, right? And so when I'm now designing that user interface, I need to think about these two different angles, the teachers and the students, right? I have to make sure that they're both scenarios are well thought of and the user experience, right, meets those needs. Now, for the teachers, you need to ensure there's an efficient grading automation, that clear insights into the student performance, control over the AI generated assessment, and transparency in how the AI makes decisions. For the student side, we need personalized learning experience, clear explanation and guidance, fair and accurate assessment, privacy and data control, usability in AI applications. What makes AI useful? So being useful means that our application can serve the desired purpose, whatever it was designed to do, whether it is generate courses, uh, write letters, send emails, whatever it was designed to do, it needs to solve that real world problem, right? So an application. Apologies, I had a slight internet problem. I will proceed. So I was saying how we were discussing how disability in AI applications. So I was talking about how if an application is generating flashcards, it should create relevant and diverse questions based on the data. And a key question to pay attention to when developing the UI for an application is, does your application solve a real world problem for your users? That's a key angle to look at things. So if you're developing, you need to make sure the backend solves the entire application, right? Front end, back end, the full stack application solves the particular use case and is valuable. So is it useful? We also talk about reliability and error handling. Now, being reliable means the application can perform its tasks consistently without errors. And we should also note that AI, just like human, is not perfect and may be prone to errors. But this is a now, the next three steps show us how to gracefully ensure that our application is reliable and gracefully handles errors. So we need to anticipate the errors, right? We need to design for situations where AI may encounter unexpected scenarios requiring human intervention, right? So let's say the model isn't trained on a particular question that the user has asked, right? We need to ensure that when we're designing, we need to prepare for it. So it'll be like risk management in a sense, right? And you're trying to ensure that you mitigate uh downtime or risk as much as possible. So you anticipate these errors. So it could be that the user asks for something that has not necessarily been defined for our use case. Now, how our model handles this is falls back to us, the front end design, the back end design. It falls back to us to ensure that we can gracefully handle the situation and then return a desired output or a different, just basically just channel the path, channel the user down a different path without canceling the entire session, right? So we need to ensure that it handles gracefully, provides clear, helpful error messages that guide users towards solution and then enable recovery, right? Allows users to easily correct mistakes and continue their workflow. So all these ensure that our model is reliable and can handle whatever use case we have designed it for. So we talked about accessibility. We need to ensure that it's designed for everybody. So you need to make sure that it's visual accessible, ensure that it's sufficient color contrast. Some people are colorblind, and we need to ensure that the color contrast match. So even if they can't see, it stands out enough. uh, Provide text alternatives. So if you want to make the text bigger, you want to make it smaller, all those things. People wear glasses. So you need to ensure that the application meets those people's needs. Then keyboard navigation. We have to ensure that the entire application we can use keyboard shortcuts to perform different tasks. So it's not just for moving our mouse or the touchpad. If we hold Shift Control this, we can do that. If we hold this, we can do that. We have to ensure that it's clear language. So it's simple, straightforward language to ensure easy to understand for all literacy levels. And then customization, we have to allow the users to adjust settings like text size, contrast, and interaction speeds. All these just ensure that the application and our setup is accessible throughout the entire application. So we now also need to ensure that we're creating a pleasant experience. Now, the back end is a lot of code, but the front end is the visual aspect of your application. How you present your application depends greatly on the front end. So we need to ensure that it's pleasant, the interface is enjoyable. There's a lot of good shortcuts. There's a lot of good shortcuts, pleasant experiences. So the pleasant experiences include intuitive, clean interface, smooth, responsive interaction, helpful, friendly messaging, delightful micro interactions, and consistent visual design. Just ensure that your application is welcoming enough, basically. And so ensure that when users come across it, they want to stay. They want to ensure that they are involved, they enjoy and make the best of our application. And then we also now look at building trust in AI. Trust is critical when designing an AI application. We ensure that our users trust and have confidence in our application that it will deliver the work that is done and needed it to do consistently. So we need to build and design with that in mind so that, and this just basically means you have good monitoring setup, error handling, and all those aspects to ensure that your application doesn't uh including like the right function calling. So there's no downtime at all. So that anytime a user comes to your platform, they are guaranteed to have their desired output every time. So we need to put that in mind. So the trust spectrum. So you could have mistrust, which is where the user has little or no trust in your system. That every other day there's a downtime, every other day there's something's up, something's wrong, it's too slow. Then you could have appropriate trust, which is usually a fine balance where the user understands the AI's capability and limitation, using it as an effective tool. And then you have over trust, where the user overestimates the AI capabilities, trusting it too much without verification. And it's also good to also know that AI can hallucinate as it's not perfect and it is prone to mistakes. So if you go ahead and overtrust your model, you might be leading your I'm trying to do research and I put too much trust in the application, right? It might be leading me wrong. And when it comes to the point where I have to defend what I've gathered, right? And everyone's looking at me like, okay, this is wrong. This isn't what what this isn't what it should be. Someone that knows this very well will look at you and be like, ah, this isn't how it should go. Yet something is definitely wrong. And this is where you have put too much trust and you have not validated the output from your AI. So no matter how good anybody says AI is or how well the application is defined, it's always good to validate and ensure that before you present your output, you've gone over it and you know what it looks like. So, for an example, in our grading system, where trust might lead teachers to not review the papers, potentially resulting in unfair grades or missed feedback opportunities. So, the two key ways to ensure trust is at the center of your design is explainability and control. Now, explainability is making AI transparent. AI can help us make informed decisions, right? And imparting knowledge on future generations, helping teachers grade, and but it's also important that we ensure that our system is explainable, right? It has the explainability feature. And what that means is we need to disclose the AI involvement to the user. So we need to make clear to the users that interacting with AI is we need to ensure that we say, okay, use AI tutor that adapts to your needs instead of start chatting with your tutor now. So we're specifying that the AI adapts to your needs based on what we have designed the entire system for, not that you just go ahead and start chatting to a tutor now without specifying what the AI does or how it is supposed to serve the use case. You need to explain how the data is being used. So we need to be transparent about how AI uses our personal data and then the limitations based on the user's persona, right? Then we need to include simplified explanations. The students and teachers may not be AI experts, so we need to ensure that our explanations from the AI are as direct and as understandable as explainable as possible, as simple to understand as possible. So that's explainability, just explaining how the AI functions to the users, using the right English, showing them how they access data, and then whatever outputs needs to be easy to understand and not full of vague, over examined text, which would just leave the student and the teachers wondering what's the whole point of this entire application to start with. And in practice would be the student persona example. A user with the student persona may have limitations based on their roles. AI may not reveal questions directly, but help guide the users help guide the users to think through how they can solve the problem. The user persona now, it might not provide the student persona now, it might not provide direct answers, right? But it would help the students understand the thought process so that the student knows how to answer the question themselves. So it's supposed to be a tutor app. It's supposed to be an educational app, right? It's supposed to teach the students, not just give them direct answers. So it needs to explain in a way that the student understands and the student can explain it if the student needs to explain it. It needs to have clear communication. So instead of simply providing answers, the AI explains its reasoning and guides the students towards understanding. So basically, this is what it is. It needs to understand the problem and explain it to the student in a way that the student can, you know, defend themselves based on what they have learned using our platform. And then we talk about control. So control is empowering the users. Giving the users control over how the system works is ensuring that there's a solid collaboration between the AI and the users. So users can modify their prompts for different results and adjust for different outputs, giving them a sense of control. So the user can customize their prompt, right, based on what they want. They can modify the output. So if the LLM gives them the flashcards and that the flashcards are not to the user standards, the users can modify the outputs and tell the model to go back and redefine the process and give me a better output. And then it also allows control of data. Users can opt in and opt out of data AI uses, choosing what information informs their experience. So we can specify what information we want the AI to use to give us our output. What platforms do we want it to get the information from? Do we want it to use Wikipedia? We want to use New York Times, Reuters, depending on the use case. It could be for marketing purposes, it could be for finance, it could be for energy. So we tell the AI model what data we wanted to use for our use case, right? So a real world example will be Bing AI. Bing demonstrates excellent user control through multiple features that put users in charge of their user experience. So this allows prompt customization. Users can tailor prompts based on format, tone, length, then modify outputs after generation. Data control. Users can opt in and opt out of data sources. For example, a student might choose to use their notes along with teacher resources as revision material. Yeah, this narrows it down for our use case and educational purposes. If we want to focus on what the teacher has been teaching or the textbook the teacher used, we can specify, okay, get me the information or summarize this textbook for me and help me understand or produce flashcards from this textbook. So a design tip is when designing AI application, intentionality is key. Is key in ensuring users don't overtrust by setting unrealistic expectation. Create frictional prompts, create friction between prompts, which results, which reminds the users that are interacting with AI and not a human being. So all this is just saying that when you're designing the user interface, there's certain things we need to keep or have in our minds, right? We need to ensure that it's usable, accessibility, the control, the explainability, all those features and all those variables ensure that by the time we're done designing our UI or user interface, we have something that meets the standard and that when we push it out there for production, for testing, that once the users start to interact with the application, they're satisfied with the services our applications provide. So we talk about collaboration and feedback. Now, collaboration between the user and the AI ensures that there is a connection between the user's inputs prompt and the generated outputs. So the diagram shows that the user inputs provides a prompt or request to the system. The AI processes that input based on the training and context, and then delivers us a desired outputs. The user evaluates the outputs, provides feedback, and the system learns from that, and the circle repeats itself. So after every iteration, our model learns from it and gets better. So that ensures collaboration and feedback. So by the time the model and the users have interacted over and over again, our model is eventually getting smarter and smarter and smarter and is able to handle more complex tasks and break them down into more understandable sequences. So implementing a feedback loop would be allow for simple rating. So you could allow a thumbs up icon. So this is we're talking about user interface. Allow for a thumbs up icon, which allows the users to click thumbs up and down or down based on the output. provide an option for the users to uh, write detailed feedback to explain what issues they came across, error reporting, easy ways to flag problems, suggestion features, let users propose improvements for us. So this is another way to implement feedback and ensure that our application and system is growing just as we are growing, so that it's not just we're learning from the users, and this is also to keep in mind so that by the time the users have used it and they can tell us their reviews, we're learning and we're trying to make our application better. In a way, allowing for this feedback loop ensures that our application grows. And as us as developers can develop better applications. So by the time the users come again, oh, we have implemented this new update. Our application now does this. Our application does this that it never did before, so on and so forth, reducing the errors and the negative feedback that we were getting. So handling error gracefully. So to handle our error gracefully, we need to ensure that we communicate the limitations, clearly state what the AI can and cannot do. Example, our product has been trained with data in history and math that cannot respond to geographic questions. So this is a good way to handle a specific error. If a user brings a use case that we haven't trained our model for, we can provide alternatives when AI can help, suggest other resources and actions the users can take. So instead of saying, oh, we don't do that here. We can say, oh, if you decide, the AI can tell the user, okay, if you go through a different angle, I'm sure we can get the desired outcome. And then you can work the user through that different pathway, that different workflow, so that the user can get that desired outcome. Even if it wasn't the way the user intentionally wanted it, as long as the user is getting that result, we have, in a sense, retained that user because now he can trust us. He can trust that when it comes to our platform, he's going to get what we want. He's going to get what the user wants. And then we have to maintain the tone. The error messages should be helpful, friendly, never blaming the user. Like, it should never, instigate. It should just be all positive, friendly, and showing that we're trying to improve. Our application is trying to grow. Our application isn't stagnant. We're not going to get left behind in 2025. If we come back here in 10 years, our application is going to be standing strong, like Facebook, like Twitter, and the likes. So ensuring that we create room for error handling and feedback allows our application to grow and grow and grow. So we'll test our knowledge. I'll leave this to you to understand. So I'll kindly ask that you go through these questions and come up with your own solutions to each question. So the key takeaways are user-centered design. We have to put our users first. Always prioritize the users, make applications useful, reliable, accessible, and pleasant. Build trust, implement explainability and control to help users understand and trust our system appropriately. Enable collaboration, define feedback loops and error handling that foster productive AI and human partnerships, and then practice and improve. Apply these same principles to your AI project, test with real users, and continuously refine your design. Uh, thank you. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the class and have learned from this session. Uh, thank you again, and have a good day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Mofeda. It was really nice. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. Have a great day, too.
You too. Thank you. You're welcome.